This is at 6:45 in the morning, so I'm not entirely sure what I said. It was like 10 minutes, but it was kind of fine. And Elijah did his monologue.
Let them watch the movie.
No, I mean, I told him where to find it. And someone looked in.
All right, friends, please get your pizza and take a seat because we have a long program. I know because I wrote it. Thanks, All right, friends, here we go. Feel free to do the wave at any moment. Yes. All right, thank you for joining me today. This is the first lecture of the third year of Pop Lunch Lectures. And 2 years ago, we had 15 kids, 2 teachers, that's Teacher Shahida and me, in a room with 15 students and 2 bags of microwave popcorn. Like that was the extent of that event, but it kicked off this wonderful lecture series. And here we are in the third year, and at least 1, if not 2, of the attendees at that first lecture are going to be presenting in our next Pop Lunch lecture. Oh, I did not test this. There we go. They're going to be presenting in January and bringing it full circle. So this is no longer purely, this is no longer purely a teacher-run venture, but now taken up by the students. So I want to thank Ms. Landon, Ms. Leggett, and Mr. Wrightville for funding your lunch and for their general support of this lecture series. I want to thank Mr. Allman for setting up all of this wonderful tech. And I want to thank Ms. Noon for vetting my presentation with me yesterday and providing great feedback, including not to sway. Okay, so here we are in the third year. In that first lecture, The Meanings of Nicki Minaj, and again, that was co-hosted in that moment with Teacher Shahida and me. And that first lecture was a foray into how we view race and gender through the lens of hip-hop. Since then, we've presented in this lecture series on topics ranging from mansplaining in country music, to Tinder, to Star Wars versus Star Trek, and other wonders of the American pop cultural world. And then, as I said, in the coming months, we'll have our first ever student lectures, Torian Love and Olivia Haynes, on the topic of Black boys in America. Their research and photography provides strong testimony to love and beauty in our community. I hope you'll join us in January for that lecture, and thanks again for being here today. So I want to start by describing my personal impetus for being here and for lecturing also in this space, and the reason why I moved to speak in general. For me, this academic space, this library, feels more comfortable than other spaces on campus to talk about misogyny in American culture. That might be because as an academic and an atheist, I feel uncomfortable sharing testimony in the spiritual space that is meeting for worship, though I wanted to at times, and I always feel welcome to do that, I just don't always feel comfortable. So that's how I continue to wrestle with being in community here at Penn Charter, and I have to say I'm incredibly grateful to have all of these channels available to me to speak. As an atheist, I should probably explain a bit more about my personal theology. As you might infer, I don't believe in God. At the same time, though, I am the opposite of godless. In fact, my teaching is kind of consumed with an urge to worship authors, texts, students, and colleagues. The thing that motivates me and enriches my life is this big, important fact. I am surrounded by gods. At Penn Charter, I see gods everywhere. They take the form of children, staff, and teachers. They shape-shift and make themselves known on different days. They are tricky and smart. They have the best sense of humor. I think that this orientation is different from seeing that of God in everyone. I believe that almost everything I need, everything that is holy, if you will, resides within humans and nature. And here are some examples. When Megan Bernstein sums up a Whitman poem by describing it as an industrial utopia, a phrase I had never heard before, I like to take that moment and bask in that joy or brilliance or whatever you like to call it. When Kayla Curtin writes a poem that evokes Furby Nobel Prize winner Derek Walcott and Emily Dickinson at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and worship that. She has created a universe, and she is a god in that moment. When Akeem Blake stands in meeting and delivers one of his crushing poems, he is a god. He is a god there in that moment. That is how I experience it. It makes my teaching life so beautiful. It also makes it much easier to write 20 college recommendations. Most of you are the perfect blend of heroic and fallible, and you are my gods. And hopefully I'm not shooting myself in the foot with that college rec thing. When I first landed here, I spent an entire year or more worshiping my English colleagues, whom I continue to adore in mortal ways. And you should too, because they are incredible humans, especially when they are dog-tired from teaching so much. And they are holiest when they are laughing and swearing. So I'm an atheist with a strong impulse to worship, and who tends to worship humans because they are amazing. You might have gathered that being an atheist humanist is also kind of problematic. For example, when I hear what's happening at the level of national discourse, and I hear how women, among so many others, are being described there, here's what's happening for me. My gods are being defiled. My beautiful, brilliant, fallible gods, my colleagues, my students, my amazing daughter, and my son and my husband, they are all being dragged around in a thick muck that says that certain people belong here and others don't, and that certain people's bodies are the property of others to access as they see fit, and all other manner of hate speech. In our formal history study, we learned that assumed ownership of another person's body is called slavery. And that arrogant epic persists into our present as our greatest national failure. Some of you know that there's a present tense of body ownership in America known as the school to prison pipeline. So body control and body oppression and body deportation is not new to America. It is a shared oppression across many groups, and the impetus comes from a particular place in the American psyche. Here's why I'm moved to speak here today. There is no moving on from the stated with the mouth, recorded for everyone to hear, misogyny that asserts that women can and should be grabbed. There is only rage, which I'm doing my very best to channel into action every day. Each day I wake up, and one of my first thoughts is about the new tools with which people are being trained to despise women, and trans people, and gay people, and Mexican people, and Muslim people, and so many others. This is a slide containing the articles produced by Stephen Bannon's media outlet, and I'll just let you linger in that for a moment. Bannon was chosen by Trump as his chief strategist. It's a very important, largely behind-the-scenes job determining what messages get out to people, and how many, and when. For people navigating this uncomfortable line of having supported an out misogynist, but not being oppressors themselves, you have work to do. If you are personally worried that you are being confused for someone who also despises people, then this is the space, Penn Charter, in which you are safe to ask, why? And also, what can I do? And now you see why it is so difficult to move on. This toxic, God-killing stuff lives out there on the internet now and is rewarded through promotion to America's highest offices and is galvanizing bigots each day. These are the reasons why lately it is all I can do to put on an outfit and not swear too much in front of the children. But these people, these deciders, to use a Bush term era, they live far away from us and from our Quaker values. Let's pause here for a definition, because I'm an English teacher. Misogyny, most succinctly put as women-hating, is an attitude of male superiority over women, and it is, as they say, as old as the hills. At Penn Charter, we tend not to see it so overtly, although I do see it at least once a day, and that seems like a small amount when you consider the generalized levels of oppression that exist in our larger world. But that's why I love to come to work, because as a white, female, able-bodied person in this space, I come and teach and mostly just exist somewhere between my mind and my heart. And that is a wild, unearned privilege, this state of being. And believe me, as I watch how people are being shaped by fear, how their expressions have changed, how they carry their shoulders, I do not take for granted the unearned privileges I have in this space. My privileges, like my oppressions, are rooted in a time way, way before this one, before America was even America. So now we're going to do a little bit of time travel back a few centuries, and I can do that because I have this magic box that links me right up with 1683. So let's go there now. So last weekend, I finally opened this box of documents that my father-in-law had preserved in the basement. This is a real box with real documents. They date from the early 1700s and span into the early 1900s. And in this box, I discovered proof of Tim Wise's claim that there is no accident, there is only precedent. So let's find out who's in the box. Anybody want to guess who's in the box? I heard Penn. That's wonderful. So in the box, which I have only just begun to explore, I found 3 centuries worth of people who allude to women as suspect, untrustworthy, evil. And of course, I shouldn't have been surprised at all when William Penn and when Thomas Jefferson showed up. So I pulled out these documents one by one like an English teacher and with Halloween candy, unfolding them carefully, this strong paper that had lasted so long. I found 3 Quaker marriage certificates, many birth and death certificates, and 4 exclusive passes to men's only medical lectures in 1785. I brought them here today. I call them the VIP passes. I found a French passport that appears to have been both issued and signed by Thomas Jefferson in 1789. This literal treasure trove contains fascinating first-person stories about our nation. And 5 days after the election, it was a solace to glimpse where we had come from so that I might venture an explanation of how we had gotten here. So I won't talk today about the Jefferson passport. I'm going to talk instead about my 2 favorite pieces, which I have also brought with me today, which you're welcome to look at after I'm done. The first is an anonymous, undated document, not a letter so much as a report, which references trial documents from 1683. All the other documents are painstakingly dated and signed, but this one is only wrapped in another paper with the invitation to the curious. It is real. Now, if ever there was a note that had traveled centuries to me, a kindred ghost waiting patiently in a basement box, it was this note. Because even while despairing, I remain as ever curious. This thing is basically addressed to me, so I opened it. How many of you already knew that William Penn owned slaves? Very good. You should. You should know that because 2 years ago we had a bunch of videos that were put together to help us understand the historical context of the founding of Pennsylvania and Penn Charter. So thankfully, it looks like you all have access to that fact and know about that fact. Yay. How many of you knew that William Penn presided over a witch trial? Okay, here we go. Let's pause again for a definition. In this time of truth slippage, I'm going to give you this ironclad definition of witchcraft, and it is not negotiable. If you have your notes, go ahead and copy it down from the slide. Just kidding. Let's eat your pizza. As you know, witchcraft and the magical powers of controlling others, including animals or crops or people's husbands, using something other than our standard powers as humans, this thing is impossible. Witchcraft, in a scientific sense, does not exist. I think we can agree on that. People did not bewitch the oxen or make the neighbor sick or cause any other trouble that nature herself was not already in charge of So witchcraft, I think we can agree, does not exist. Can I get a thumbs up? Anybody in the middle on that? I like it, okay. So we must view this European import of witchcraft as what it actually was in the 15th century and beyond, a way to dispose of women who did what they were not supposed to do, be it speaking badly of someone or speaking at all or having a birthmark or existing or whatever it may be. So let's go back to the treasure box. So according to the document, remember that To the Curious document, William Penn presided over the trial of 2 alleged witches in 1683. William Penn. In this report, an anonymous writer, so this isn't the trial document, this is someone who went and researched the trial. In this report, an anonymous writer consults some law documents and then summarizes the trial in her own words. And my favorite part is that the author of this document underlines the words witches. You can see the underline. So the person's like, oh my gosh, underlines the words witches and William Penn several times because she could not even believe it. Or she wanted others to not really believe it, but then to see it. She gives references to where the facts of the trial exist and where to find them. So I'm imagining this author as having a bit of time at home for some smoldering outrage with her fountain pen and her too-tight corset. And this author seems very, very intent that we curious people know about Penn and the witches. How did the witch trial come out? Did you say dead witches? That is a likely explanation. And he did find them guilty, but with a benevolent twist. Our founder, at that moment, did not rise up against the misogyny of his time. No, he found those witches 100% guilty of a crime known as having the reputation of being a witch. Which is really the best accusation ever if you reside among practicing misogynists. To stand guilty of the crime of having a reputation of wrongdoing, well, I think you may agree that I could be dragged off to jail at any moment. So back to the treasure box. Penn did not move against the trial altogether, but he did hedge in a rather quakerly way. The women's sentence, unlike so many other sentences elsewhere in the colonies, did not result in their deaths. William Penn, in his benevolence, did not have them hanged or drowned, but instead invited them to demonstrate their good behavior for the next 6 months. In the ultimate misogynist slow shade, Penn imposed a fine on their husbands, who were charged with ensuring that the would-be witches clean up their nasty acts. And clearly the husbands had been doing something wrong until then. So Penn's true benevolence, and this is a benevolent act, was that he dispatched with witch trials altogether after that experience, and no more of that nonsense occurred in Pennsylvania, though it continued apace in my home state of Connecticut, where it remained on the books as a capital crime until the 18th century. So this would be very, very juicy if this were like released into the world for the first time because I found it in that treasure box. And of course that's not at all the case. All of this is online, but none of us knew about it, right? So none of this was revealed for the first time in the world of that treasure box of documents. It's documented online at Pennsbury Mansion site, among others, but watch the narrative. I didn't know about the witch trial, and you didn't know about it. And my point here is that Penn, our founder, whose vision brings us together today in fellowship, sat with Margaret Matson and Yeshua Hendrickson and judged them guilty. We must connect our now with our historical misogyny. We must watch the narrative and watch what's there and watch what isn't there. Know what we know and what we don't know, and then consider why. So now we're going to my second favorite document. We're going to travel over to my own family. They're all seated here. And we're going to go over to spend a bit of time with this 18th century Philadelphia banker, businessman, and obstetrician in the namesake of my husband, J. Preston Thomas, and his father, J. Preston Thomas, who are both here today. And I'm going to read this amazing bio I found online of Jonas Preston. It's written by an anonymous, again, another anonymous author. I love this. Philly-grown blogger, Grochlart, who writes about architecture in the city. And I'll bleep out most of the expletives. Representative, Senator, Councilman, banker, shipping tycoon Jonas Preston, MD. This dude was born in Chester in 1764, raised by a single mom in Wilmington, and graduated from medical school at the University of Pennsylvania at the age of 20. He would have graduated even earlier, but some courses were delayed because of the Revolutionary War. After his schooling, Preston tried to be a farmer in Chester, but it didn't work out. He was so pissed about his failure that he went off to find himself in Georgia for a while, hanging out with his close friend, General Wayne. And then he returned to Chester and started a medical practice, and Preston married a Newtown, PA heiress named Oprah Reese after convincing her mother that he was good with money, despite being somewhat of a dandy. Preston would go on to live in Newtown and fight in the skirmish related to the Western insurrection. Upon his return, he was considered a hero to everyone but the Quakers, who kicked him the F out of their circle of friends. Preston then served in PA's House of Representatives and then the Senate. His wife left him in 1811 due to him being away all of the time and also the dandiness. Preston's second marriage was to Jane Thomas, so now we're in the Thomases line here, who in 1816 nagged him to relinquish his offices, which at this point also included bank commissioner and president of the Bank of Delaware County, and she convinced him to move away from boring Newtown to the most amazing and kick-ass city in the world, Philadelphia. Dr. Preston practiced medicine at a time, this is end of the bio, Roach-Lard's bio, so now we're back in my own words. Dr. Preston practiced medicine at a time when it was a gruesome business, residing somewhere between butchery and witchcraft. So please, ladies, take a moment to remember how lucky we are to have access to good health care today. Dr. Preston's mission was fueled by a benevolent passion for helping indigent women, indigent means poor, indigent women of good moral character. And here is how he wrote that mission in a treasure box draft, another document that appears here today, for an article for the Pittsburgh Gazette, which was published in 1812. It hath been observed that many chaste and respectable females in the Commonwealth have of late years been so far seduced by pernicious example as to lay aside the modest and useful attire heretofore used by chaste females, and to appear in public places with naked elbows and shoulders and other parts of the body, clad with such transparent attire as is incompatible with decency and altogether insufficient to preserve their bodies from the inclemency of weather. So you probably noticed right away that Dr. Preston's concern for his patients focuses first upon their moral character, and then the imminent threats of their elbows and shoulders. He also alludes to other body parts, the ones I think that are his actual medical specialty, but those regions and the weather are a distant second to those scary arm parts. So I wonder aloud, if you are concerned that arms and shoulders are enacting evil just by existing out in the air, how effective can you be in treating the parts that have real sicknesses? 2 lines into his 1812 article promoting the Preston Retreat, which was built in Philadelphia and was a refuge for poor women during childbirth, Preston simultaneously appears as a literal